Before we go to the next item on the agenda, which is a panel discussion, I just wanted to touch on a few things, and I actually paused to share that with the members again, more of it as a refresh, so that once you hear the content from the speakers, you would then build a greater context on this. So first things first, 2022 was the year when a number of states, especially on the eastern seaboard, have launched and or shared consulting papers with respect to their state biosecurity plans. So that is that we listen from Malcolm, we listen from Catherine. There's a few underway that they're still about to finalize. For example, New South Wales and Tasmania, they're still doing their works to bring it to a decent shape. So which is great to hear as well at some point in the future. So this is a coordinated effort, and to top it up, we also heard from Kat, from DAF, Commonwealth Government, on how this is a coordinated effort. So that's biosecurity, kind of how things are traveling in that space, and what can Traceability do to be able to actually enhance those biosecurity efforts that are being put into play. I'd like to actually have a panel discussion now. Welcome back all the panelists, Kat Waterhouse, Malcolm Letts, Catherine Clift, and also Joe Bunting, if you're still on the call, Joe. Joe is a familiar face for a number of us on the traceability journey. So welcome, Joe, and welcome back the speakers, Kat, Malcolm, and Catherine. So it's great to listen to you all today on a number of different things happening in each of those states. You may have covered the answers to some of my questions already. In that case, it could be probably rephrasing a few of those. So I'll probably start with the DAF. So happy for you to sort of share whom you're gonna be responding to this question, either Kat or Joe. This is more in terms of keep it open. So this is more in terms of how can traceability genuinely help the biosecurity efforts. It's a key primary driver, as we have heard and as we've been actually listening to for the past many years. How do you see the next steps evolving in terms of traceability, pushing the boundaries of biosecurity response mechanisms for the next decade or two?
That sounds like one for me, Kat.
I was going to say I'll leave that one to you, Joe.
No problem. I think at the outset, and I mean, noting I speak looking at the national system, but each jurisdiction very effectively manages traceability for biosecurity purposes. So Catherine or Malcolm may want to chime in at the end. Australia's traceability systems are currently effective in supporting biosecurity outcomes and are a key part in evidence and recovery from any incidents, and part of an effort nationally to provide more assurance within Australia and to our export partners that we do have a good handle on pests and diseases, and that we remain free of many exotic animal diseases in particular, but also many pests that make our produce particularly attractive in export markets and safe for both domestic and international consumers. There is, of course, always room to improve and evolve to ensure that something that is fit for purpose now will also be fit for purpose into the future. And I think that is why all agriculture ministers in September last year agreed to mandate individual electronic identification of sheep and goats. That's an effort to continuous improvement of livestock traceability, and there are other things that are constant parts of discussion under the National Biosecurity Committee under Ag Ministers on that. At the level of the Commonwealth Government, the department and the government is also very committed to systemic uplift of traceability, including through enhanced use of data and data-enabled traceability to support both biosecurity and export outcomes. It is about having the right evidence in a timely manner to be able to support. And while There are many, many ways to deliver on traceability. Like paper still works for many people in many particular circumstances. That continuous improvement effort and that innovation effort to bring value-added benefits and better assurance is a focus for the Commonwealth, particularly when we're talking about opportunities for market access or to protect existing market access, demonstrating new claims and credentials through traceability. So traceability is already here. It's already one of the fundamental backbones of biosecurity. There is always a need to look at how to make sure it stays fit for purpose as there are more risks or more technologies available. But there's no doubt that we have a great system already, and also great plans to improve, as outlined by both Malcolm and Catherine.
Joe, thank you very much. Just for the benefit of our audience today, I just wanted to reiterate that there is a 6-point plan or a priority areas which Kat shared earlier. And one of them is about coordinated preparedness and response. And that is where the traceability is directly linked to. And it actually clearly calls about strengthening traceability arrangements. I think that's where the clean link between how can traceability provide that level of transparency to be able to tackle any kind of biosecurity threats. So just for the benefit of everyone, it's a quick recollection, but thank you. Thanks, Joe. That was really wonderful to hear. I'll probably divert my question to Catherine, more from the Victorian perspective, if that's okay. You shared us a number of different initiatives that the Victorian government is actively leading, and that's really great to know. The question probably is much in a broader sense. Biosecurity definitely is a national priority, and as a result, enabling that and traceability also becomes a national priority. What would be your advice for organizations who are more reactive in nature as they deal with biosecurity as an ad hoc, as it happens, event rather than a strategic priority for them? Do you have any advice on how they can work with AgWIC? Any other next steps that you wanted to actually bring them on board? It's a broad question, so happy for you to sort of give guidance on how do you want to bring organizations on the journey here. Thanks, Catherine.
Yeah, look, thank you. And I think I would definitely agree that there is quite a wide variety of maturity amongst the different sectors, the industry participants, the groups and organisations that we work with when it comes to traceability. And as Joanna mentioned, you know, some people are still more comfortable with the pen and paper versus some who are really looking for very integrated, digitally based solutions. And then some who are still grappling to get to grips with what is this thing called traceability and how does it impact on my business. So what I would say is there is some really good information available for people who want to get that sort of more understanding of what the options are, how they may fit with their business. For example, the Traceability Hub that I mentioned earlier has quizzes and some guides to help people start to build their knowledge and understanding of what might be appropriate for their business. But I think in terms of that question of the reactive versus the strategic focus, I can only see this becoming more and more important, and it becoming more and more a core part of all the businesses that are involved in the agricultural supply chains. So I think it is going to get harder and harder for businesses to ignore this or not to participate, and it's going to increasingly get driven through the supply chains because of requirements that are coming from either overseas governments in terms of their requirements. Some of you may be aware of the US FDA requirements that have been coming in, and there's a whole range of overseas requirements, whether they're official government requirements or more tied to consumer or organisational requirements by importers. So I think it's going to become more and more important that people are aware, they have a good understanding, they understand the benefits that this can provide to their organisation too. I mean, Malcolm and I didn't really touch on that because obviously we're in government, we work more at that end of the spectrum, but there's real opportunity for some of these technologies and some of this data to support businesses to become more efficient, to really understand their business better, and also to manage some of their risks better. I've worked in food safety as well as biosecurity, and the way that you're able to manage recalls, for example, and make them really limited and small as opposed to very large, can have a really big impact on your business survival and sustainability. And you can only do that if you've got really good traceability, really good understanding of your risks, where your products are and how they relate to the particular incident that you're dealing with. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. I think that's amazing. Absolutely, it has to be a coordinated effort, and making it a strategic priority provides the pathways in ways of faster response to these threats. So, and I appreciate your response there. Thank you. I'll now focus on Malcolm's messages. Key messages today. Malcolm, if you're okay, I have probably two questions, but I'll go one after the other. So first thing, you touched upon a portal that was launched in 2019 that has a number of livestock registrations. But would you like to actually provide a bit more clarity for the benefit of the members attending this event today, and what it is, and if there is a way for them, if anybody missed out, if there is a way for them to get more engaged on that, on the portal?
Thanks for the question. The registered biosecurity entity, as I said, was built through that mid part of last decade and launched in 2019. It's a user pays fund, so there's a registration fee that everyone has to pay underneath anyone who's got livestock, or including those people with more than 100 birds. However, we also open it up to those people who aren't considered to be commercial livestock owners, including horse owners, as a free register. With the idea of enticing people to register, because the more people we've got on the system, including hobby farmers and other players in the industry, they are all biosecurity risks, as we know. So the more of them that we can capture, the better. It's got basic information. It enables us to push information out on a regular basis, but particularly in a response. So we can actually contact people. We've got all of their contact details, and we can go straight to them with updates in relation to an outbreak or any other matter that's of relevance to them from a biosecurity point of view. Registration, as I say, funds the upkeep of the system, enables us, and obviously we need to keep using it to make sure that it stays relevant and active for people as well. So we push out regular updates through that system to livestock producers across Queensland. And it is, as I said, linked in with the NLIS, but obviously the NLIS is not relevant to people like horse owners or poultry owners. However, as Catherine alluded to, there is a project underway around horse traceability, for example. Lots more horse owners are microchipping their horses already. So ultimately, if there is a national register for horses, we would be looking to link the biosecurity register in with that as well going forward.
Thanks, Malcolm. That's really helpful. I may probably want to dive into the next question there. You touched upon plant traceability as well. One of the things that we have been observing is that there is a significantly coordinated effort in terms of livestock traceability, especially we heard about from you itself, the sheep and goat EIDs, and then from Catherine about horse. And in general, we know where things are heading in the direction, which is very positive. But I can probably make a key assumption that plant traceability isn't that advanced enough. And that is that beginning of the conversation that you alluded to. Would you like to kind of, with your experience in play, what it does take to actually build the next steps for the plant traceability to be real?
Yeah, thanks, Ram. And I think everyone probably understands this, but the motivation for the national livestock system was really foot and mouth disease, or any of those. I mean, that's the key sort of headline disease from the point of view of market access. So if we were to get a foot and mouth disease outbreak in Australia, anywhere in Australia, we would lose market access. And the beef industry is a 70% export industry. So the ramifications for Australia would be, estimated at $80 billion for that order. So the sooner we get onto it, the sooner we can control it, the sooner we can get back to market access, the better. That's that's the really strong motivator in relation to why it was done in livestock. To an extent, the same risk is not present to the same extent in the plant industries, therefore the motivation is not as great. However, I'm sure those people online who represent plant industries would be well aware that there are some pests and diseases, if they were to get into Australia, would also remove the potential to access markets. So there would be many markets that would close potentially their doors to Australian exports as a result of a pest or disease. One of those we actually have in Queensland at the moment, red witchweed, which is a parasite of plants, including cereal crops, and grain producers in Australia have been very supportive of the response to eradicate that particular pest, not because it potentially has major impacts on production, but because it has major implications for market access. So I think the idea of a traceability system for plants is really important. The other comment I would make is that a lot of the biosecurity threats in the plant industries are less diseases and more pests, so hitchhikers, BMSB, capra beetle. There's a whole range that I could go through. That the question of traceability is not as obvious in terms of its application with those tests. So once again, there's a bit of a disconnect in relation to the potential or the motivation associated with us building a national traceability system for plants. You're right. I've been involved in this space now for too many years. And I have to say, a few years ago when GS1 appeared on the scene in relation to expressing an interest to be involved, it did answer a big question in my mind around the technology and the locator requirements to, if you like, replace the pick element that the livestock industry has. So from my point of view, I'm encouraged, and I think there's some obvious more work that we can do. The piece that's missing, as I said earlier, I think is still around that governance question. So governments generally really struggle when industry comes to them with a solution. But we don't actually handle that very well historically, and so I think that's a challenge for us going forward in terms of how we actually step up and make the most of the opportunity that GS1's presenting. Thanks, Ron.
Thanks, Malcolm. I think that's really comprehensive response to that question. I think it's a general kind of a priority right now on the main scene about plant traceability, and appreciate you actually putting that significant efforts into pushing that forward. Really appreciate it. I think for the benefit of the audience today, GS1 as a standards organization provides a number of different identifiers, and this plant property identification is through GLNs is one such significant common language, which we keep calling these days, that actually helps us communicate that anybody in the supply chain can understand. So that's kind of what Malcolm was referring to in this commentary.
If I could just add to that response, there is a question in the chat about priorities for plant industry producers. So if we were to provide advice to plant industry producers around particularly their capacity or capability, what would that be? And my perspective is around on-farm biosecurity. So if I was to give a plant producer one piece of advice, it would be what you can do yourself in relation to establishing the best on-farm biosecurity system you can. And that comes from experience with working with the banana industry and other industries that have had to be dealing with biosecurity threats and incursions. There's lots that we can do in terms of building national systems and what have you, but that's not something necessarily that individual plant producers can do anything about. But they can do something about their own on-farm biosecurity and familiarising themselves with risks, so that in their day-to-day operations, their eyes performing a surveillance function for and on behalf of the industry more generally. We're looking to do a similar sort of thing across the broader services sector for the plant industry. So those people who work in agronomy and researchers, stock and station agents, those sorts of people, providing them with some updated capabilities in terms of being able to identify pests and diseases. And there's some work that's been happening with other applications, etc. The sorts of things that Catherine was talking about in the various jurisdictions around that space as well. Thanks, Graham.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I was about to actually pull that up, but you kind of helped us. Thank you. Really appreciate it. That's probably the main questions that we would like to actually go through today in the panel conversation. This is about how the coordinated efforts of state and federal governments are coming together in terms of pushing the national biosecurity agenda. At the same time, how traceability is going to help. So I really appreciate your time and the panelists' time to be able to actually give that perspective, share the perspective with our members today. Thank you.